A strange girl in the rain. The cold rain fell hard on the old metal roof. Harvin, a man in his late 60s, wore a thick brown coat and worked slowly on his broken fence. He lived alone on a small, quiet farm at the edge of the forest. The planet was dark, cold, and wet for most of the year. Harvin didn't mind. He liked silence. He didn't have friends. He didn't need visitors. He just had his tools, his animals, and the sky. But that night, something strange happened. As Harvin hammered a wooden board into place, he heard a sound, like someone breathing, soft and broken. He looked up. The wind was strong, the trees shaking. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. But then he saw her. At the edge of the forest, in the rain, stood a girl. She wasn't human. Her skin was pale blue, almost glowing in the dark. Her silver-white hair stuck to her wet face. She wore nothing but a thin cloth around her body. Her eyes were large and bright, glowing softly. A long tail wrapped around her legs. She looked no older than 20, but her face held sadness, deep and old. Harvin dropped his tools. The girl didn't move. She looked at him like a lost animal, afraid, weak, and cold. "Are you hurt?" Harvin asked, slowly stepping closer. She didn't answer. She just shivered and took one small step forward. Her bare feet touched the muddy ground. Her lips moved, and a soft voice came out. "Please, just one night." Harvin blinked. Her voice was soft, like wind. She spoke in clear standard, perfect, but quiet. Harvin looked around. No ships, no signs of others, just her. He knew he should be careful. She could be dangerous. Maybe a trick. Maybe someone sent to rob him. But when she looked at him again, he saw something else. She was scared. Harvin sighed. "All right," he said. "Come in. You'll freeze to death out here." She didn't smile. She just followed him, slowly, silently. Inside the house, the fire was still burning. Harvin handed her a towel and a blanket. She sat near the fire, wrapping herself tight, still shaking. Her eyes watched everything, like a wild creature in a new place. Harvin made soup, simple and warm. She didn't speak while eating, but her hands were shaking badly. He noticed bruises on her arms and dirt on her legs. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked up. Her lips opened, then closed. "I can't say," she whispered. Harvin nodded. He didn't ask again. "You can sleep in the guest room," he said. "It's warm. You'll be safe here." She looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. Before going to her room, she said one thing. "Thank you for not asking questions." Harvin didn't sleep much that night. The wind howled outside, and he kept thinking about her. Who was she? Why was she alone in the forest? What happened to her? At midnight, he heard a soft noise, a strange hum, like low singing. He got out of bed and walked to her room. The door was slightly open. He peeked inside. She was sitting on the floor, eyes closed, glowing softly. Her hair floated slightly, even with no wind. Her skin shimmered, changing from blue to faint pink. She was whispering something in her language, something sad. Harvin didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. Pain. Loneliness. Something deep. Suddenly, her eyes opened and looked straight at him. Harvin froze. She stared at him, but didn't move. Her eyes were glowing brighter now. Strange, deep pink light swirling inside them. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to spy." She didn't blink. Then slowly she whispered, "It has started." Harvin frowned. "What has?" She didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes again and lay down on the bed. Harvin backed away and gently closed the door. He walked back to his room, but sleep never came. Something was not right. She was not just tired or lost. Something was changing in her, something she didn't want to say out loud, and Harvin had just invited it into his home. She's not just cold, she's changing. Morning came slowly, like a she visitor. The rain had stopped, but the air was still wet and heavy. Clouds hung low over the trees. Harvin made tea in the old kettle, trying to push away the strange feelings from the night before. He hadn't dreamed. He hadn't even rested. His thoughts stayed on the alien girl in the guest room, on her glowing skin, her strange whisper, her final words. It has started. Started? What started? The kettle screamed. Harvin poured the tea and walked quietly to her door. He stood there for a moment, unsure if he should knock. Finally, he raised his hand and tapped gently. No answer. Miss, he said softly. Still no sound. Worried, he slowly opened the door. The room was warm. Too warm. Heat rolled out like from an oven. And there she was, on the bed, curled up, her skin bright and shining like moonlight. Her forehead dripped with sweat. Her breathing was fast, shallow. She was burning up. Harvin rushed to her side. Hey, are you okay? Her eyes fluttered open, glowing again, but this time flickering like a candle in the wind. Don't touch me, she said in a dry, cracked voice. You have a fever, Harvin said. You need help. She tried to push herself up, but her body trembled too hard. She fell back onto the bed, weak. I told you, she whispered. It has started. Harvin sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her. What do you mean? What started? She turned her head slowly and looked at him. My season, she said. He frowned. Season. I'm not like you, human, she said. My kind, we are not like Earth people. Once in our life, something inside wakes up. A fire. A pull. We call it the calling. When it begins, our body changes. If we don't bond, we die. Harvin stared at her, confused and concerned. You mean, this is natural? For us, yes. But only once. One chance. If it passes, the body breaks. It overheats. The heart stops. Harvin stood up, shaken. You're telling me you're dying. Because of this season. She nodded slowly. Unless the bond completes. He took a step back. What kind of bond are we talking about? She looked away. I didn't choose this. I didn't plan to come here. I ran from my people, from my future. But my body doesn't care about choices. It only follows the season. Harvin walked to the window and stared at the trees. He had seen many things in his long life. He had fought in wars. He had worked with aliens, traveled to far colonies. But nothing prepared him for this. A girl. No, a woman from a different world, burning with something she couldn't control. And he had brought her into his home. He turned back to her. Is there medicine? A cure? No, only the bond can stop it. Harvin was quiet. Then I'll take you to your people, he finally said. Maybe someone there can help. Valeri's eyes filled with fear. No, they'll use me. I'm special. I'm royal-blooded. They'll force the bond. Lock me in a cage like an animal. Please, I escaped that fate. Don't send me back. Harvin felt something tighten in his chest. She wasn't just some runaway. She was hunted, hiding. And now she was dying. You're asking me to do what then? He said. Help you. How? I don't want to force anyone, Valeri whispered. I just need time. A place to rest. To survive. Harvin nodded slowly. Then I'll build you something outside. A shelter. I don't want you to feel trapped. But I also don't want you to suffer here. She looked hurt, but nodded. Thank you. He spent the next few hours building a small warm shed near the house. It had blankets, water, heat panels. He brought her there carefully, her body still glowing, her skin hot to the touch. Before leaving her alone, she grabbed his wrist. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't choose you. But when you touched me, something inside changed. I feel you. Even now. Harvin gently pulled his hand away. I'm just trying to help. That's all. That night, he sat alone by the fireplace. He stared into the flames, thinking about her words. One season, one chance, bond or death. He had always been alone. No wife, no children. He never wanted that kind of life. Too much pain, too much loss. But now, a young alien woman, dying, glowing, beautiful in her own strange way, was resting in a shed behind his house. And she said she felt him. He poured himself a drink, took a long breath. Outside, the wind blew again. Then he heard it. A soft cry, not from pain, but from loneliness. He stood up, heart pounding. He walked outside, slowly, his boots crunching on the wet ground. When he opened the door to the shed, Valerie was on the floor, shaking hard. Her arms wrapped around herself, her tail curled tight, her breath shallow. Her skin was now glowing deep pink. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I'm losing control," she said. "It's getting stronger." Harvin took a deep breath. "What do I do?" She closed her eyes. "Stay. Just stay. You don't have to do anything else. Just be here." He nodded. He sat beside her, not touching her, just close. And slowly, she stopped shaking. The glow dimmed. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was calm, peaceful. But Harvin knew this was only the beginning. What her kind really needs. For the next few days, Harvin barely slept. Valerie's condition came and went in waves. Some moments, she lay quiet, calm, glowing only faintly. Other times, her body burned with inner fire, her skin bright pink, eyes shining like twin stars. Harvin stayed near but kept his distance. He didn't touch her again. He built more comfort in the shed. Extra blankets, soft light, gentle music. But it wasn't enough. Valerie was fading. One cold morning, Harvin left her sleeping and rode into town, an hour away by speeder. He went to see an old alien trader named Brosh, a three-eyed creature with gray skin and a heavy voice. Brosh was the only one in town who had lived long enough to know old space lore. "I need answers," Harvin said, "about a girl." Brosh looked up slowly. "Alien girl." Harvin nodded. "Her name is Valerie. She said she's from a royal bloodline. Something about a season, some kind of mating fire." Brosh's expression changed instantly. His third eye opened wide. He stood still, as if frozen in fear. "Valerie," he whispered, "you took her in. She was lost, alone, dying in the rain." "You fool," Brosh growled. "You don't know what you've done." Harvin crossed his arms. "Then tell me." Brosh sighed and slowly sat down. "Valerie is one of the Kishani, ancient race, rare, almost extinct. They're females, once in their life, go through the mating season. If the bond isn't completed, their bodies shut down. But if the bond is made, what happens? They belong to the one who touched them first." Harvin blinked. "Belong? I don't mean as a slave. I mean spiritually, soul-locked, forever, no matter the species. One touch during the calling, and the connection begins. It grows stronger each day. And if the chosen one walks away, they die." "No," Brosh said darkly. "Both suffer. But the Kishani female suffers more. Her soul burns." Harvin looked down at his hands, the same hands that had offered her shelter, and that brief touch on her skin. "She told me she didn't choose this." "No Kishani ever does," Brosh replied. "But it's nature, older than law, older than war. And their people, they protect these females like treasures. Or worse, treat them like tools to control power." Harvin nodded slowly. "She said they'd force her into a bond." Brosh's three eyes narrowed. "If the royal family finds out where she is, they'll come, and they'll burn the world down to get her back." Harvin walked out of the shop without another word. Back on his farm, the wind was sharp. Clouds were thick and low. Valerie was awake, sitting near the open shed door. She watched the sky like it was whispering secrets. Harvin stood beside her. I talked to someone, he said. She didn't turn. He knew your kind. He told me what happens after the bond. Still, she said nothing. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Now she looked at him. Her eyes weren't glowing now. They were soft, cloudy, tired. Because the truth scares people, she said. I didn't want to scare you. You didn't, Harvin said. But I needed to know. Villari closed her eyes. My people used to celebrate the calling. It was sacred. But over time, they turned it into a tool. Royals forced into bonds for power, for land, for control. When I felt my calling begin, they locked me in a tower. You ran, Harvin said softly. Yes, she nodded. I escaped through a broken wall. I crashed my ship here. I wanted to die free, not as someone's property. But now you're here, Harvin said. And I touched you. You saved me, she said. And now, I feel everything. He sat down beside her, keeping just enough space. What do you feel? Villari looked at the clouds again. I feel your sadness, your quiet heart. I feel your hands, even when you're far. I feel your dreams at night. You see someone, a woman, her voice, her laugh. Harvin was stunned. My wife. She passed 10 years ago. Villari placed her hand gently on the ground between them. She was kind. I feel that. You cared deeply. You still do. Harvin nodded. I'm too old for all this. You're just alone, she whispered. So am I. A soft breeze passed between them. Harvin looked at her differently now, not as a creature, not even as an alien, but as a woman who had no one left. What if I said I wanted to help you? He asked. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Villari blinked, tears gathering. Then I'd stay alive, she said, and you wouldn't be alone anymore. They sat in silence again. A deep silence. Not heavy, not empty. It was the beginning of something. That night, Harvin dreamed for the first time in years. Not of his late wife, but of Villari standing in a field of stars, glowing silver and pink, calling his name in a voice that felt like music. He woke to a strange noise, like humming. He ran outside. The shed was glowing. Villari stood in the center, her body floating inches above the ground. Her hair flowed like smoke. Her eyes were closed. Her skin now shimmered gold. She was calling, but not just him. Something far, far away was listening. Harvin rushed in. Villari, what are you doing? She dropped to her knees. I couldn't control it, she said. It's getting stronger. The bond is reaching out. Someone may have heard. Suddenly, the ground rumbled. A shadow passed overhead. Harvin looked up. His heart froze. A dark ship had entered the sky, and it was heading straight for them. She's not alone anymore. The dark ship hovered silently over Harvin's land like a shadow from another world. Its engines made no sound, but its presence shook the ground. Crows burst from the trees, screeching into the sky. The animals on Harvin's farm ran in circles, restless and afraid. Inside the glowing shed, Villari knelt, breathing hard. Her skin flickered between gold and deep pink. Her eyes stayed shut, lips moving in silent whispers. Her bond pulse had traveled far. And now someone had answered. Harvin grabbed his old rifle from inside the house. It wasn't built for war, but it could hold off small trouble. He ran back outside and stared up at the ship. It was smooth, black, with no markings, but he knew enough from his past to recognize a hunter-class vessel. Villari, he called, rushing to her side. You have to move. She looked up slowly. They found me. Who? He asked. Her voice cracked. Collectors, my people's enemies. They hunt my kind, especially females in season. The ship landed beyond the trees, hidden behind a hill. No sound, no lights, like a snake waiting in tall grass. Come on, Harvin said. We're going underground. Villari shook her head. I'll slow you down. My body is weak. You go. Save yourself. Not happening, Harvin said sharply. You're not dying on my land. He helped her to her feet. Her legs trembled, her breath quick. The bond was burning hotter inside her now. And with the danger near, it pulsed wildly. They reached the hidden hatch behind Harvin's old barn, a cold, rusted metal door. He pulled it open, and together they went down into the small underground shelter. It wasn't much, just a small room with water, food, and air filters. Harvin had built it during the last war, hoping he'd never need it again. Valerie collapsed onto a cot, her body still glowing faintly. Above them, the ground shook. Boots. Heavy, armored boots. They were here. 3 figures moved silently across Harvin's land. Tall, clad in blood-red armor with long masks covering their faces. Their eyes glowed blue under the helmets. Each carried a plasma spear and a scanner device in hand. The scanner beeped, slow, steady, then faster. Targets near, one of them hissed. Shani Royal. She's ready to bond. She's ripe. The second one growled. We're not leaving without her. They searched the shed first. Still warm, but empty. They moved toward the barn, weapons ready. Inside the bunker, Valerie cried out in pain. Harvin grabbed her hand. Stay awake. Stay with me. I can't hold it back much longer, she whispered. The bond is screaming. If they touch me before it's complete, I'll be lost. You're not theirs, Harvin said. You're not a thing. You're someone. Suddenly, boom! The hatch above them blasted open. Dust rained down. A red armored soldier dropped in, weapon ready. His blue eyes locked on Valerie. She's here, he shouted. Harvin fired. The blast hit the soldier's shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed into the wall. But 2 more dropped down right after. One grabbed Harvin and slammed him to the ground. Valerie screamed, her body glowing brighter than ever. She's in mid-bond, one of them said. Too late to stop it now. But we can still take her. She's mine, the other shouted. No, came a new voice. Valerie's voice. It was deep now, echoing. Like 2 voices in one. Her skin turned from gold to pure white. Her eyes turned silver. I've chosen, she said. The air shook. A bright flash filled the bunker. The red armored men screamed, covering their faces. Harvin shielded his eyes. When the light faded, the soldiers were unconscious, burned, stunned, thrown across the room. Valerie collapsed again, breathing heavily. Harvin ran to her, held her close. You saved me, he whispered. No, she said with a small smile. We saved each other. Later that night, Harvin dragged the unconscious soldiers outside and destroyed their weapons. He sent an emergency call to the nearby sector patrol. They would collect the intruders soon. Harvin didn't explain much, only that they were trespassers. Back inside, he found Valerie sitting up. Her glow had dimmed. Her voice was stronger. They'll come again, she said. Others. Let them, Harvin replied. This is my home, and now it's yours too. She looked at him with wide, soft eyes. I can feel the bond. It's almost full, but I'm scared. Of what? He asked. That you'll leave, that you'll reject it. Harvin sat beside her. He took her hand gently. I'm just a broken old man. I didn't ask for this, but I don't regret meeting you. I never knew kindness until I met you, she whispered. All my life, I was a thing, a treasure, a tool. But you looked at me like I was someone worth saving. He smiled. You are. For the first time, Valerie leaned against him. No fear, no fire, just warmth. That night, they didn't speak. They just sat under the stars, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. Above them, the sky was clear, quiet. But deep in space, more ships were moving. The bond had sent a signal too strong to hide. And now, others were coming. But so was something else. Valeri's transformation was not over yet. The bond begins. Days passed. The rain no longer fell, but the skies stayed gray and heavy. The air was thick, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Harvin could feel it, the change. It wasn't just in Valeri's skin or in her glowing eyes. It was in the space between them. In the silence they shared. Something deep and powerful was building. Something ancient. The bond. It was no longer just a feeling. It was a presence. Invisible, but alive. Sometimes Harvin would hear her voice in his mind. Soft whispers, memories, songs in languages he didn't know. He wasn't afraid anymore. Valeri stayed close now. She no longer hid in the shed. She walked with him, sat with him, helped him tend to the animals. She wore one of his long coats and covered her head with a hood when outside. She smiled more, but her eyes still held that sadness, like a clock slowly ticking toward something final. One morning, Harvin found her standing by the river, barefoot in the grass, staring at her reflection. Her skin shimmered silver and white. Her body looked thinner, but her eyes glowed stronger. Her tail floated gently behind her. He walked up slowly. "You okay?" She didn't turn. "It's almost complete," she whispered. "Soon, I won't be just Valeri anymore." "What do you mean?" "I'll become what I was born to be," she said. "The true Kishani bondmate. Royal form, my body will change. My mind too." Harvin looked at her, confused. She turned to him. "But I need you beside me when it happens, or I might not come back at all." "Come back. If the bond completes without you close, my soul might tear apart. I could lose myself in the pain, the power, the pull." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then softly, "Then I'll stay. For every second." Valeri smiled gently. "Thank you." They sat together on the riverbank, letting the silence speak. That night, the signs began. Valeri's body began to tremble again, like in the beginning. But this time, it was different. It wasn't weakness. It was power. Waves of heat came off her skin. Her eyes turned gold, then pink, then violet. She spoke in her language while in a trance, her voice full of sorrow and beauty. Harvin stayed with her in the bedroom, where he had moved her after the last attack. He sat beside the bed, holding her hand gently, never letting go. Suddenly, her body rose into the air. Glowing threads of light spread from her back. They looked like wings made of pure energy. Her hair floated around her like a silver halo. Harvin stood, amazed and frightened, but he didn't move away. Valeri's voice echoed, not just in the room, but in his mind. "Do you accept me?" Harvin's heart pounded. "I do," he said out loud. "I don't understand everything, but I accept you." Her glow brightened, so bright it turned the whole room white. Then came silence. She dropped back into his arms, softly, gently. Her body had changed. Not much, but enough to see. Her eyes now had rings of silver. Her skin shimmered like moonlight. Her tail was longer and pulsed with warm light. Her voice, when she spoke, was deeper, richer. "It's done," she whispered. Harvin helped her lie down. He wiped her forehead and smiled. "You did it." "No," she said. "We did it." She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. And then he felt it, like a warm wave inside him. A second heartbeat, hers, beating in time with his own. For the next few days, they barely left the house. Valeri's energy returned quickly. She laughed now, told him stories about her world, about the glowing cities built on water, the giant trees that whispered at night, the flying beasts she once rode as a child. Harvin listened, amazed. He hadn't felt this alive in years. But even in peace, the warning signs remained. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Valeri suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes narrowed. She sniffed the air. "They're close." Harvin stood. "Who?" "Not the collectors," she said. Worse. A moment later, the skies lit up. 3 ships entered the atmosphere, sleek, golden, with the crest of the Kashani royal house. "My people," Velari said quietly. She stood up. "I thought they would take longer." "What do they want?" Harvin asked. "They want me," she said. "They'll see the bond. They'll see I chose a human." "Will they care?" She nodded. "They'll try to break it." Harvin's face hardened. "Let them try." Velari touched his cheek. "You don't have to fight. You already gave me life." He grabbed her hand. "I'm not letting anyone take that life away." The royal ships landed in the open field beside Harvin's barn. The air grew heavy with pressure and light. From the lead ship stepped a tall female figure, dressed in gold and crystal. She had no tail but held a long staff. Her face was sharp, cold. "Velari," she said, "you have shamed the crown." Velari stepped forward. "I made my choice." The royal woman looked at Harvin. A human. Weak. Mortal. "He saved me," Velari said. "He completed the bond. Then we must undo it." "You can't," Velari said firmly. "It's done. It's forever." "You think forever matters to the court." The woman spat. "You are royal. You belong to your people." "I don't belong to anyone," Velari said. "Not anymore." The woman raised her staff. A wave of energy burst forward, meant to knock Harvin down. Velari stepped in front of him. The blast hit her instead. But she didn't fall. She stood, glowing, stronger than before, and her voice echoed loud and proud. "I am bonded. I am not yours. I am his." The sky roared. The bond shimmered between them, visible to all. The royal woman's eyes widened. "Then you are no longer royal. You are exiled." "So be it," Velari whispered. She turned to Harvin. "Are you ready to leave this world?" He nodded. "With you, always." The royal ships rose and flew away, silent and defeated. Velari's own small ship, hidden for weeks in the woods, was ready. Together, they left the world behind. The heartbeat returns. The stars stretched across the sky like rivers of fire. Harvin had never seen the galaxy from space before. Sitting beside Velari in her hidden ship, he felt small, yet not afraid. Her hand in his made everything feel right. They flew in silence for hours. Velari didn't need to speak. The bond between them now whispered thoughts, memories, emotions. Harvin could feel her joy, her fear, her hope. And she felt his. Sometimes she'd look at him and smile without a word, as if she heard his heart. "I'm taking you to a safe place," she said softly. "Your home." "No," she replied. "That world was never mine. I was born there, but I never belonged. This place, it's somewhere special." The ship glided into orbit around a quiet planet, a soft blue sphere with clouds like cotton and land that glowed faint green. "Welcome to Emilion," she said. "A forgotten world. Few know it exists. It's where my mother once went to hide. Long ago." They landed on a cliff beside a forest of light crystal trees. The air shimmered. The wind hummed softly, like a song. Velari stepped out, barefoot, smiling like a child. "This place slows time," she whispered. "1 year here is like 10 on Earth. It heals. It calms." Harvin followed her slowly, feeling lighter with each step. He could breathe better here. The pain in his joints faded. His tired body felt young again. "How is this possible?" he asked. "The bond," Velari said, turning to him. "It feeds from the land now. And this land responds to love." They walked until they found a quiet waterfall. Velari knelt by the water, touching it gently. "I need to complete the last step," she said. Harvin frowned. "I thought the bond was already done." "It is," she said, "but there's more. The Kashani bond doesn't just tie souls. It rebirths them. I must let go of my past form. This body, my old self, must die so the new one can live. Harvin's heart tightened. What does that mean? She looked up at him, eyes soft and glowing. It means I'll stop being who I was and become who I was always meant to be. But I need you with me. Without you, I might not return. I won't leave you, he said quickly. Not now. Not ever. Valeri smiled. Then she stepped into the water. It shimmered around her, glowing white, rising like mist. Her body began to float. Harvin watched as her skin turned brighter, her hair fanned out like wings. Her body slowly dissolved into light. No pain, no fear, just peace. And then she vanished. The water stilled. The wind stopped. The world went silent. Harvin dropped to his knees. Valeri? No answer. He waited. Minutes passed. Then hours. Still nothing. He sat by the water all night, refusing to sleep. The bond inside his chest grew fainter, so faint he could barely feel it. Don't leave me, he whispered. Not after everything. He closed his eyes, clutching her coat close to his heart. Then, just before dawn, a soft thump echoed in his chest. Then another, and another. The bond pulsed, strong and full. The water shimmered. From the center of the pool, light rose like a flame. Then a form appeared. Not glowing, not floating. Real. Valeri stood there, new. Her body had changed slightly, taller, stronger, more graceful. Her hair flowed behind her like silver water. Her eyes were deep violet, filled with galaxies. Her tail had a second band of golden light. Wings of pure energy flickered on her back. But her voice, it was still hers. Harvin, she whispered. He ran to her, held her tight. You came back, he breathed. I followed your heartbeat, she said softly. It brought me home. They built a home on that planet, small, quiet, beautiful. Crystal trees lit the night like stars. The river sang to them each morning. Time moved slowly. Their hearts beat together. But peace never lasts forever. One evening, as they walked near the cliffs, Valeri stopped suddenly. Her eyes darkened. What is it? Harvin asked. There's one more, she said. A hunter who doesn't follow the royal court. He's old, dangerous. He collects bonded pairs to steal their energy. Harvin gripped her hand. Does he know where we are? She nodded slowly. He followed the last bond wave. He'll come, and he won't stop until one of us is dead. That night, they prepared. Harvin dug up his old weapons from the ship. Valeri summoned energy from the planet itself. She was stronger now, reborn. But even so, the hunter was not ordinary. The next evening, the sky darkened, not from clouds, but from shadow. A black vessel appeared, jagged, sharp, with red cracks glowing from its surface. It landed without sound, like a demon stepping into the world. From it stepped a tall figure, his face covered with a silver mask, his arms full of wires and weapons. His eyes glowed red. His voice was deep and hollow. Valeri, you've changed, he growled. I am no longer yours to chase, she said firmly. Leave. You bonded with a human, he said, voice full of disgust. Weak, soft, old. You waste your power. I chose him, she replied. And now we stand together. The hunter raised a long blade made of black energy. Then die together. He charged. Valeri stood firm, wings of light bursting from her back. Harvin raised his rifle. Let's show him what a weak human can do. The final battle began. His last journey, or first. The black hunter moved like a shadow given form. His blade of dark energy hummed through the air, swinging with deadly speed. The ground cracked under his feet. Trees bent away from him as if afraid. But Valeri stood her ground. Her wings of light spread wide, her hands glowing with pure energy. Each step she took sent soft ripples into the ground, like the planet itself was listening to her. Harvin stayed behind her at first, rifle aimed, heart pounding. He had seen war, He had survived explosions, storms, and space battles. But this was different. This was personal. The hunter charge. Valerie raised her hands, creating a wall of light between them. The black blade clashed with the shield, sending a shockwave that shook the hills. Sparks of red and gold exploded in every direction. "You are not a queen," the hunter growled. "You are a mistake." Valerie's voice was calm. "I am bonded. That is all I need to be." The hunter pushed harder, breaking her shield. Valerie jumped back, wings flaring. She fired a beam of energy at his chest, but he deflected it with his blade. He was strong. Too strong. Harvin didn't wait. He stepped forward and fired. The shot hit the hunter's leg. Not enough to kill, but enough to distract. Valerie struck. She moved faster than the eye could follow, her body glowing like fire. She slammed into the hunter with a blast of light, throwing him backward into the crystal trees. They shattered around him. But he stood up, bleeding, angry, laughing. "You think love can protect you," he sneered. "You think a bond makes you strong." Valerie stepped beside Harvin, her hand finding his. "No," she said, "but together, we are stronger than you can ever be." The bond between them glowed bright, so bright it formed a golden ring around their bodies. The hunter charged again, one last strike. Harvin raised his rifle again, but it sparked and died, out of power. Valerie looked at him with fear. The hunter's blade came down. Harvin didn't move. He stepped in front of Valerie. The blade struck, but instead of cutting, there was light. Pure light. The bond had shielded them both. The blade cracked. The hunter screamed, his mask breaking, revealing a face twisted by centuries of hate and darkness. Valerie stepped forward. "This ends now," she said. She reached out, not to destroy, but to purify. Her hands touched his chest. The bond energy surged, not just from her, but from Harvin too. Combined, their light spread through the hunter's body. He fell to his knees, gasping. "No, I was supposed to collect your soul." "You have no power here," Valerie whispered. And then, with one final burst of golden light, the hunter vanished, turned to dust, carried by the wind. The silence afterward was heavy, but peaceful. It was over. They buried what remained of the hunter's ship under the cliffs. The planet felt warmer. The trees sang softly again. The bond between Harvin and Valerie had not just protected them, it had saved the world around them. That night, they sat by the river again. The stars reflected in the water like diamonds. Valerie leaned against Harvin's shoulder. "I felt you protect me," she whispered. "You were ready to die for me." Harvin nodded. "I was, and I still am." "But I don't want that," she said. "I'd want you to live for me." He chuckled. "Well, this planet does seem to like me." She smiled. "The time here moves slower. You'll age 10 times slower than you would back on Earth." Harvin raised an eyebrow. "You mean I get to enjoy another 100 years of this?" "Maybe 200, Valerie teased. "If you behave." They both laughed softly. Then she turned serious. "Harvin, do you miss Earth?" He thought for a long time. "Sometimes," he said, "I miss the smell of the soil after rain. The old songs on the radio. My wife's roses, but I don't miss the loneliness." Valerie looked down. "I was so afraid that I'd bring pain into your life, that I'd ruin your peace." He gently took her face in his hands. "You brought me back to life." Tears welled up in her eyes. "So did you." Weeks passed. They built a small garden near the waterfall. Flowers from Valerie's world. Vegetables from Harvin's seeds. Animals came to live nearby. Small, soft creatures drawn to the peace of their presence. One morning, Valerie woke with a strange glow in her eyes. She stood by the window, holding her stomach. "Harvin," she whispered. He sat up quickly. "What is it? Are you hurt?" She turned slowly, smiling with tears. "No," she said. Something's growing inside me. He blinked. You mean? Yes, she said. I'm with child. Harvin sat in stunned silence. A child. From two species, from two hearts, from one bond. Their bond. He stood slowly, walked over, and placed his hand over hers. A soft heartbeat pulsed under her skin. A second heartbeat. A new life. Years passed on 1,000,000, but only a few on Earth's time scale. Harvin didn't feel old anymore. His back stayed strong. His eyes stayed clear. The planet kept him alive. Their daughter was born under the silver moonlight, with wings of light and laughter like wind chimes. They named her Ori, a word from Velari's language meaning born of both stars and soil. Ori grew fast, wise beyond her years. She could speak through the bond at only 3 cycles old. She could heal animals with a touch. She was a child of peace, but strong like her parents. One day, a group of explorers passed through the region, lost travelers from a distant galaxy. Velari welcomed them, fed them, guided them home. Word began to spread of a strange planet, of a couple, human and alien, living as one, of a bond that could not be broken. One quiet evening, as Harvin stood on the hilltop watching the sunset, Ori ran up behind him. "Papa," she said, "Mama says dinner's ready." He smiled, turning to her. "I'm coming." She looked up at him curiously. "Papa, were you ever afraid?" "Of what?" "Of loving someone so different." Harvin knelt beside her and took her hand. "I was afraid of being alone," he said, "but she gave me something no one else could." Ori smiled. "What?" He looked toward the glowing trees. "A second chance." Later that night, as he lay in bed beside Velari, she whispered, "You're not just part of my bond now. You are my life." "And you are mine," he said. They held each other close. Their heartbeats, once separate, now forever one.